Okay, so Aristotle is asking us to read this paper called Huck, Finn, and the Inverse Akratic, Empathy and Justice, which is cool because it's not very long, by Chad Kleist in the Ethical Theory and Moral Practice journal. So let's do this. You know what? Let's do that. Much better. Good. And if any of y'all want to follow along, there you go. So this is Huck, Finn, and the Inverse Akratic. And we're good to go. Awesome. And as always, let me know if you have questions along the way, and we're going to try. So this is from 2009, it looks like. Back to ethics, it looks like. Empathy and justice. Oh no, you have a headache. Feel better, Caudillo. I appreciate you coming by and chatting. It's good to have you here. Try to break it down as best I can. Don't always succeed, especially some of the more arcane philosophy of language things, but I like that stuff at least. Okay, so introduction. Greek philosophers have been interested in the relationship between one's reason and desires. The latter is certainly not always subject to or in line with the former. The center of this discussion is called akrasia, or weakness of the will. An akratic act can be seen when a person believes performing X, all things considered, is the correct act, and yet she performs not X. On the other hand, an inverse akratic act is one in which someone believes X, all things considered, is the correct act, and yet performs not X, where not X is the correct act. So they were right, but for the wrong reasons. Yeah, so they're right for the inverse correct akratic act is where they believe X is the right thing. They don't do it, but the thing they did actually was the correct act. Okay, so they're right for the wrong reasons. A case of inverse akrasia that has been discussed in philosophical literature is that of Huckleberry Finn. I will examine Rosalind Hursthouse since she addressed the issue of inverse akrasia and Huck. In addition, I will draw on Jonathan Bennett's helpful analysis of Huck's sympathy and morality. Furthermore, I will reference Nancy Snow's article on empathy, in addition to Martin L. Hoffman's empirical psychology work on the relationship between empathy and justice. My aim in doing this is not to examine the literary character of Huck Finn, but instead to use the figure of Huck to investigate moral psychology, especially moral and emotional phenomena such as sympathy and compassion. Oops, I forgot to update the number. Let's get back to the number. Sorry about that. This is just more for me in some sense, because I post everything to YouTube, which you're gonna see is getting posted in chat every so often. You can find all my old ones in chat. So, I mean, my old philosophy roulette reactions to papers up on my YouTube channel. So, okay. In the first section, I will use Huck to examine the nature of inverse akrasia. Furthermore, I will show how Hursthouse answers the complexity of Huck Finn as an inverse akratic. In section 2, I will explore the nature of empathy and show how it can provide insight into inverse akrasia through Huck Finn. In section 3, I will develop the relationship between empathy and justice. From this, one will see that Huck Finn's empathic feelings are closely related to a principle of justice. In 4, I will agree with Hursthouse that Huck is a virtuous agent, not fully virtuous, on the path to a virtuous life. Okay, I mean, I don't, just as a point of note, I hate these, outline paragraphs. I mean, I do it as little as possible, but okay. Inverse akrasia can be described as an act by an agent who believes she is performing the wrong act and is actually performing the correct act. What makes such an act unique? First, it seems counterintuitive that one truly believes she is performing the wrong act and at the same time follows through with the act. Most people, I believe, act because they feel it is right. However, the inverse akratic is unaware that she is performing the correct act. Second, for the inverse Akratic, her weakness of will is superior to her judgment. The notion that an agent's will contradicting her reason is not uncommon, however. To say that the will has directed one to perform the correct act, unlike reason, seems very odd. Yeah, I mean, if you're saying all of your reason says to do one thing, you don't do it for like some other ancillary reason, but that turned out to be the right thing. It would have to be the right thing for your ancillary reason, which by definition it is not, and so you have definitely not done it as an act of will. You didn't do it for the right reasons at that point. You're right, but for the wrong reason. The ancient Greeks have developed the notion, following through the virtue ethics tradition, that if desires are in accordance with one's reason, then one will perform the correct act. However, this is contrary to the inverse Akratic. Hursthouse recognizes the complexities with this issue. She addresses it in her influential work on virtue ethics. Here, Hursthouse explains the problem of how an inverse Akratic can be virtuous even though she believes her acts are wrong. I will show how Hursthouse accounts for virtue within the inverse Akratic. However, I must first explain a well-known case of the inverse Akrasia, that is Huck Finn. I have a crush on Zendaya too. Like, what's wrong with having a crush on Zendaya? Actually, I haven't even. I think I know who Zendaya is, but like, yeah, like Zendaya seems like she's cool shit. Like, that's awesome. A little comment right here is like my prima facie guess of what's gonna happen is, look, if you have, because it looks like we're in the virtue ethicist world, and so you're gonna have virtues. You could be doing the right thing for the wrong reasons because you have some virtues that do not perfectly align with how you should be. That does not make your virtues necessarily the wrong virtues. They just may not be perfect virtues. And so you're doing things for the wrong reasons, but it still could be out of a halfway decent virtue. That's kind of what I'm guessing where this is going to go, that you can have like some incomplete virtues and that will work most of the time, not all of the time. And so, Infernal, how are you? Good evening, good evening. We are now reading a paper on the ethics of being right ethically for the wrong reasons. So, and it's called inverse Akrasia in the literature, apparently. So I hope you're doing well. Oh, if you're here, that means I can't raid you. Oh well. All right, I'm gonna continue, and as always, feel free to ask questions or whatever. You know what? Yeah, that's right. If I'm not raiding Infernal, I at least can give Infernal a shout out, because my shout outs are working again. There we go. Hey, look, there's Infernal. I gotta point this way, even though my screen's up to my side. Everyone go follow Infernal if you are not already following Infernal. Infernal is good people. She teaches sociology, I believe, at the moment, and also does fun things on stream like play video games, makes cosplays, and yeah, and it's fun. Yeah, you're too tired to stream. I get that. It's a surprising amount of effort at times. Okay. Anyway, let's get on reading with this. Huck Finn, in Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, is an adolescent boy growing up in the slave-driven South. He is a very complicated character who seems to be naive to his surroundings, and in some ways he certainly is. However, that in itself does not make him worthy of blame. Huck becomes friends with a runaway slave named Jim. And not teaching him more, doing more research as an assistant. Hey, that's cool. Get that research done too. He believes it is his duty for what he has been taught to turn Jim in. In not performing this act, he believes his actions are morally blameworthy. He had numerous opportunities to give him up, but never follows through with them. Instead, Huck follows his heart, so to speak, and remains friends with Jim for the duration of their trip. From the very moment he had met Jim, he believes it is only right to hand Jim over to the authorities. On the other hand, his compassion enables him to take extreme measures to save him. In other words, Huck has a conflict between his reason and desires, where he believes the former is correct and the latter wrong. Inverse Akratics follow their desires even though they believe their desires are wrong. However, in doing so, they have performed the correct act. Okay, so this is even I think more straightforward than what I was gonna say. It's like, well, sometimes your desire is more aligned with the virtues than your reason aligns with the virtues. So I get that. Like, if you have, especially in the Western cultures, the notion of like inherent value in every person, um, then maybe you think your desires are going to inherently get certain things right, uh, in like the Western religious tradition, and so that would align with the virtues somehow. You might inherently, naturally align with the virtues. Okay, Hursthouse provides her interpretation of Huck insofar as it fits her model of virtue. She does not want to say that Huck is a fully virtuous agent, and yet she recognizes the virtuous qualities he displays. Huck is very loyal and courageous. Both of these qualities are manifested in the same action, that is, not returning Jim when given the opportunity. Consider the scene in the book wherein two white men approach Huck and ask him about the color of the man's skin on the raft. Huck, trying to answer according to his reason, can't, and thus responds, he's white. If Huck had been caught lying, he would have faced horrific repercussions. Thus, such an action is virtuous. Likewise, by Huck not telling the truth and ultimately keeping Jim from being turned in, he has shown loyalty to his friend. Hursthouse grants that Huck is acting V virtuously, acting V where V is the virtuous act being performed qua that virtuous act. Aristotle says, this is more interesting than a merely cognitive moral psychology. It's not that you luck into the right thing, it's that you listen to your gut, which has a knowledge on its own. This is an odd spot for Aristotelians. Oh, interesting. I see why. Yeah, so, see, I was thinking of this in sort of like the like religious tradition where, like, you know, kids have some sort of virtue just by being like pure. But from the Aristotelian perspective, yeah, you have to train yourself to get things right. And so without that sort of inherent sort of goodness of inherent goodness, then yeah, then it makes it more complicated. Okay, so I see why you were interested in this paper. Okay, to help clarify Hursthouse' position on what it means for an act V to be qua that virtuous act, for example, being courageous or loyal, I would like to consider an example. Imagine a person who saves another from a burning building. Hey, can you whisper me so I can whisper you? Oh, you're talking to him. I was like, maybe I should do some more ASMR streams. Sorry about that. I distract myself when reading these things. Anyway, I would like to consider an example. Imagine a person who saves another from a burning building. Furthermore, let's assume all things considered, the act is courageous. Consequently, according to Hursthouse, we can say this person has performed a virtuous act, namely saving a person from a burning building, qua courageous, not qua virtuous. Okay, so they were being courageous, which happened to be virtuous. She finds this claim significant because it precludes any false preconceptions that one must be fully virtuous in order to perform such an act. Thus, one may be courageous, perform a courageous act as the courageous person would, and yet not possess all the virtues. Moreover, this can be applied to Huck insofar as he has performed virtuous acts, qua courageous and loyal, without being fully virtuous. Alright, as Aristotle was saying, so it looks like what they're doing is they're using minor virtues to get some of the major virtues right, because like you have a gut and that gives you certain minor virtues. So okay Huck has certainly performed a virtuous act, but one must ask why. Is there anything? Wait, do I want to write something else? Now let's continue for a minute. Huck certainly performed a virtuous act, but one must ask why. Most people would say slavery is immoral, Jim deserves the same opportunities as a white man, or we have an obligation to protect those who are oppressed. However, none of these thoughts are explicitly expressed by Huck. As a matter of fact, he continuously states that he has a moral obligation to do otherwise. Hursthouse believes it is enough to say that Huck acts for X reasons based on his loyalty and displays of friendship to Jim. We do not have access to the exact reasons why Huck has protected Jim, since he continuously says he is doing the wrong thing. However, that does not hinder him from providing Jim a safe haven to the best of his ability. This leads Hursthouse to conclude that Huck saves Jim because his heart is in the right place. She does not develop this any further, but one can assume by this she means that Huck has a natural state of compassion that believes Jim ought to be freed. This can be seen when Huck is paddling away in the canoe. He once again considers turning Jim in. However, at the last moment, Huck continues to paddle, and Jim responds with gratitude. Huck thinks to himself, "I got to do it. I can't get out of it." This statement, "I can't get out of it," refers to Huck's never-ending compassion to keep Jim safe. The only option Huck follows is one that will benefit Jim. He knows that he cannot get rid of those feelings to help Jim. However, he cannot figure out why he has not turned Jim in, but feels the pressures of society telling him to do so. Regardless of the situation, his desire obliges him to not report Jim. Huck performs the correct act because he feels something inside him, something he cannot describe, guiding him to perform the correct act. This is why, according to Hursthouse, Huck performs for X reasons, where X represents Huck's compassion to free Jim. Therefore, we can that Huck acts V for X reasons. Okay, so yeah, this is the akrasic virtue here, the akratic act. So he's weak, but he gets it right. He gets virtue for the right. He gets the virtuous act, but for the wrong reasons, because he's doing it for X reasons, which are not the right ones. Okay. In saying Huck acts in such a way, Hursthouse does not want to grant that he is fully virtuous. However, he is morally motivated insofar as he has performed the correct act because his heart is in the right place. Moral motivation, according to Hursthouse, entails the agent having explicit, current thoughts about the rightness of what they are doing. I'm losing it. Hursthouse grants that Huck certainly does not possess such thoughts at first glance. However, she further writes that this does not preclude him from acting because it is right. There is certainly much to be said for this. Alright, let's get a little farther, and then we'll maybe discuss. Huck always considers the action he is about to perform and that which he has already done. Even though he never explicitly says, "I am doing the right thing by helping Jim become free," his continuous ponderings after every action shows he is constantly thinking about why he helps Jim. Bennett provides us with a line that perhaps indicates Huck has more explicit thought than we may give him credit for. Huck says to himself after lying to the white man in search of Jim, "So I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it, but after this always do whichever comes handiest at the time." Here Huck hints at the fact that he is acting for a particular reason, namely the one that is handiest. Furthermore, if we combine this with his lines of compassion, we can see Huck's thoughts are current insofar as he acts with a compassionate, pragmatic purpose. This, in turn, allows Hursthouse to grant that Huck is morally motivated. Aristotle says, Akratic and Akratic people have desires pulling them in the wrong directions, but they also know what the right thing to do is. Akratic continent people listen to their head, though, and they can overcome their bad desires and do the right things. Akratic people listen to their bad desires and go against their beliefs and do the wrong thing. Yeah, this is what was called the inverse Akratic. Sorry, I think I said the wrong thing. But, it's good to have these definitions there. Yeah, you have to have... The idea is that your desire and your rationality do not line up. And there's a question why that is. What actually counts as rationality here? And why are you being loyal to certain other ideas versus your gut, which you may feel desires for, and then you've got some sort of rational, what we're calling rational, but in this case it's following the social rules. Now, is that rational to follow the social rules? I don't know. Sometimes not, maybe. But yeah, I appreciate you clarifying. I think I did say it wrong at least once, but that's okay. Yeah, so the question is, for me, in some sense, for Aristotle, you have to get it right on all accounts, right things for the right reasons. Here they're saying, look, can you be right for the wrong reasons? And they're trying to split the difference by saying, well, you're right because you've got some lesser virtues, or you've got some other virtues that sort of got it kind of right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I see they have to build up the fact that Huck has other things going on. So they have to establish that there is some sort of reasoning going on, which is happening now. And then they're going to say, well, this reasoning is good enough. My question is always the one of my problems with virtue ethics. It's also the problem with, well, all the other sort of the big ethical systems is, how do you choose between what virtue to act at and what what rule do you follow in deontology? What calculations for the good do you use in consequentialism? And what virtues do you follow in virtue ethics? So, like, how do you choose between these things? And so the idea that Huck might be following the what is a quote like so-called rational, why is that one given the benefit of the doubt being called rational versus something else? Why is following the society rules the rational thing? It is, but why? I don't know. And so it's like, why is that one considered the rational, the virtuous, according with Aristotle, not the chatter, but the ancient philosopher? Why do you have to say that you do the right thing in the right reasons? Well, why are some of them right and why are some of them wrong? How do you know that ahead of time? Or even in retrospect, you're just hindsight's always 20/20. But like, how does Aristotle know which one's right? So, is one of my general problems with this area. Not specifically with this paper though, but yeah. But Aristotle is getting it right, and Aristotle, the chatter, is getting it right in the sense that in virtue ethics, you need to have like underlying reasons that like sort of you're motivating things. You have to get for Aristotle, the ancient philosopher, you have to have it right for the right reasons. So yeah. Aristotle says, for rationalist account of neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics, it all grounds out in flourishing. You have to have an idea of the good life, and you have to try to get your life to align with that. Yeah. So, again, but like, how do you calculate the good life at that point? That's like, that is what they say. And you have to get out in the world and you will understand something of the good life. But like, from the armchair, like when I'm arguing about this stuff, I never understood how people are able to figure that out from the armchair. And of course, Aristotle knew this. Aristotle was big on the go out and do. Like, you have to go out in the world and practice stuff. So, but yeah. Yeah, Aristotle says, empirical observation of what makes certain lives better than others. I think it's inherently comparative. Yeah, but I mean, yeah. And that's the issue. It's a relative thing, and you're not going to get relative comparisons sitting in an armchair. So it is definitely by inherently empirical in that sense. Yeah. Okay, continuing. Hursthouse concludes that although Huck believes he is doing wrong, he still acts V for X reasons, so virtuous for whatever reasons. In other words, he has performed virtuous acts of loyalty and generosity, qua loyalty and generosity, because he is compassionate. However, Hursthouse remarks that he is not as fully as virtuous as a fully virtuous agent, because he never explicitly says his acts are right, since that would require knowing that his acts are correct. Hursthouse maintains that although Huck never knows he is performing the correct act, he still acts virtuously by following his heart. Have a great night, and thank you for being here. And get some good rest. Hursthouse argues that this merits Huck worthy of praise. In saying Huck's praiseworthy, she believes her account is meeting the demands of Arpely and Schroeder's whole self. She writes that they claim rightly that not only the actions but also the motives of the three agents Huck merit praise. In other words, Hursthouse standard of praise entails that Huck's actions and motives, namely Huck's whole self. Consequently, she believes it is essential to show Huck performs V for X reasons. Upon showing Huck acts virtuously for the correct reasons, she believes she can assign praise to Huck's whole self. She argues, I believe rightly, that Huck performs V for X reasons. We see glimpses into the future of the possibility of Huck's virtuous character, but according to Hursthouse, that does not imply that he is fully virtuous. Since Huck is not fully virtuous, Hursthouse does not praise him in the same manner she would if he had known his actions are correct. Yeah, let me just You know, I like actually making notes on the screen, so I'm going to do that real fast. So, it's... Ugh. Not as easy as it looks sometimes. Right? For the wrong. Yep. Okay, so we're right for the wrong reasons. So that's what we're talking about here. Why is it okay to be right for the wrong reasons is really what's at stake. And the author is arguing why it is right to be okay for the wrong reasons is because Huck is virtuous, but not fully virtuous. Okay. In summary, Hursthouse argues that Huck Finn has performed the correct actions for the right reasons. His reasons, according to Hursthouse, come from the heart. And this is sort of a weasel that you say it comes from the heart, has a good heart, is doing things from his gut. That explains nothing. That's just might as well be hand waving. But it's saying that there's something inherent to Huck Finn that makes him good. Of course, saying inherent is no better than saying come from the heart. But like this is just sort of the concept I think in a lot of religious things that people are inherently good. And I think Aristotle, the ancient philosopher, felt maybe that you had to be trained up. And so it was a slight difference from like the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. That this is it's a slight difference just between them. Okay, there are a number of passages that bolster her claim. For example, Huck says he just can't give Jim up, but never gives a reason why. This passage implies a feeling in Huck that helps guide him to perform the virtuous act. Huck's empathic feeling with Jim must be explicated in order to understand why he empathizes with Jim. Before I delve further into such matters, I must explain the nature of empathy and how it applies to Huck. Okay, so what looks like they're happening now is instead of just saying, okay, there's something inside Huck, they're going to say that Huck has the property of empathy. And so once he had that property of empathy, that's how he is guided to do the right thing. And that is going to stand in place of having correct training. Instead, it is, it's going to stand in place for that, is having like the empathy. So maybe he's a moral saint in some sense because he has a very strong sense of empathy without maybe being trained up on that sense of empathy. All right. So section 2. Snow begins her discussion on empathy by defining it and showing how it differs from sympathy. Empathy in general means having a feeling with someone. There are 3 criteria for Huck: H, to empathize with Jim's; J, emotion E, of wanting to be free. J feels I hate these things. Jim feels some emotion. Huck feels the same emotion because Jim feels that emotion, and Huck knows or understands that Jim feels that very same emotion. There is a further condition that can be applied to higher cognitive levels of empathy, which states that 4, Huck understands that Huck feels the empathy because Jim feels the empathy. So as the meta understanding that he understands that he has empathy for Jim. Snow states that the 4th condition is neither necessary nor sufficient for empathy, but as I have stated, shows a higher cognitive form of it. Sympathy, on the other hand, is merely having feeling for someone. If Huck sympathizes with Jim, then Huck feels sad for Jim. However, he actually empathizes with Jim since he experiences with Jim what Jim feels. The difference between these propositions seems minute, but has big implications. If Huck is merely sad for Jim, it still allows for Huck to be sad about the situation and not understand what Jim is going through. In other words, if Huck feels sad for Jim because he is not free, Huck is only sympathizing with Jim. As the conditions show, this is far from empathy. Aristotle says, this is somewhat unclear in Aristotle, but for Aristotle he seems to imply that if you've been socialized in society, you have the universals of morality in your head. Everyone tends to know what the right things are in the abstract. Most of our disagreements happen at the particular level. Okay. Yeah, in some sense you got big picture stuff, it sounds like. I understand that there's like big picture stuff. Caudillo, we haven't gotten anywhere. The author is just hemming and hawing. You don't have to worry about it. The whole point, and that's why I wrote it down, why can you be ethically right for the wrong reasons? That's what they're explaining here. And now they're giving us some definitions. It doesn't really matter. We're going to get in the next little bit where it's going. But that's nothing's happened actually in this paper. They're just setting everything up. And it's one of the problems. I already griped about how the author put for a short paper had like this full outline in the beginning. This person likes to write. And a lot of philosophers do. This is not a gripe against this particular person. It's just the style of philosophical writing. So nothing's happened. Nothing at all. It's just, why can you be right for the wrong reasons? We're finally getting somewhere, but we haven't gotten anywhere yet. Now, the question is that Aristotle is bringing up is how innate is our goodness? Because in the classical Aristotelian sense, because once you've been enculturated into society, don't you actually know generally right from wrong? In some sense, being entered into society, you do learn what the society trains you to treat as right from wrong. And so I think that is part of what's going on here, is because Huck has been trained into the Southern society where he should turn the slave Jim into the authorities because Jim is running away. And so, but how much of that is really, you see, that's in some sense very uncritical of the ancient philosopher Aristotle. I mean, isn't that like just an uncritical, non-reflective view of what you're getting from society, saying that most of it's right? Aristotle says, alright, he's giving some background here. Oh, thank you, DeMarshall. Good to see you. Oh, I haven't seen you in a bit. Thank you for the Eid wishes. I appreciate that. I hope you're doing well. Oh, yeah. It's, thank you. Yeah, we're reading this on a paper at the moment on can you be right for the wrong reasons in virtue ethics, according to like Aristotle. And we have the philosopher, the contemporary philosopher Aristotle here, discussing this also. So it's interesting. But well, in the sense that like they seem pretty good to you. Well, the sense that that Huck understood that he was supposed to turn the slave in, because according to the local laws, and he was supposed to follow the laws, it was rational that he turned in the Caudio, sorry, not DeMarshall. Yeah, good to see you too. It just seems that it was the rational thing. Like, if all of society is telling you that you should do something, but you sympathize or empathize with somebody else, they do seem good. But that's kind of the point of the author here, is that there are competing rational choices to be made. If you have empathy for another person, they're going to argue that it is rational. And so you're right, Caudio. That's where this author is going. They just aren't there yet. Yeah, so continuing. I believe Huck empathizes with Jim. Yeah, but like, again, there's a lot, Caudio, there's a lot of societal pressure. Like, it's like everyone you ever knew would tell you did the right thing. So it's not just an extra cookie or whatever. But like, in some sense, you've got like all of society saying, well, you have to do this sort of thing. It's just what normal good people do. And you're not going to get a whole lot of praise because you're expected to do it anyway. So that can be a lot of pressure. All right, continuing, I believe Huck empathizes with Jim because Jim has a feeling of wanting to be free. Huck feels Jim wants to be free because Jim feels it, and Huck knows or understands Jim wants to be free. Jim's feelings are very complicated since his desire for freedom entails many other emotions, for example, joyful, scared, sad, etc. Huck considers Jim's emotion of becoming free. It made Jim feel trembly and feverish. Moreover, Bennett writes of Jim, "Pooty soon I'll be a shoutin' for joy, and I'll say it's all on account of old Huck, I's a free man." You're following now, but you don't understand. He did the right thing for the wrong reasons. It seems to me he did the right thing for the right reasons. In the lore, let's just call it the lore, Caudillo, the right thing is the rational thing. It skews to being the one that is cognitively rational. Moreover, in the book, Huck always said that he felt it was doing the wrong thing. He understood that he was supposed to be turning Jim in. And so in the setup, Huck is saying that we all think Huck did the right thing, but that wasn't what Huck was feeling at the time. And so it's just sort of the lore of the time, being in like the South of America, in the Southern America at the time. It was so we'll see. He did the wrong thing for the right reasons, depending on what position you're in. So, like, he did the right thing for the wrong reasons because he thought he was not supposed to let Jim become free. Or he did the wrong thing by letting Jim go, but for the right reasons because, he felt that was the right thing. Yeah, but, depending on the standpoint. Are you from the standpoint of society or the standpoint of Huck, where he's feeling it? The only, the question these people are asking is, if society is telling you what you're doing is wrong and you think society is generally right, but you do something different, then if what you actually did that was different, even though you thought it was wrong, it turned out to be the right thing, how do we explain this? Because why do we think it's the right thing? So, yeah, I mean, this is the problem. You have to understand the situation at the time, and if you're not as versed in the story of Huck Finn, it makes things harder. A lot of what the fucks, I understand. Well, philosophy has a way of complicating crap, I'm sorry. Okay. These two passages indicate the complexity of Jim's feelings. I point this out because it could not possibly be demanded of Huck that he experience or understand every emotion that Jim experiences, but rather have a basic sense of why and how Jim's feelings are to be freed. There should not be much controversy over the first condition. Jim wants to be free, since this has been shown throughout the paper. However, I want to investigate conditions 2 and 3, since they will explain why Huck wants to see Jim free. After Jim tells Huck that he is the only white person he could trust, it had begun to take a toll on Huck, and he decides not to paddle ashore. By not paddling ashore, Huck has aided Jim to continue his quest for freedom. There are a number of inferences which satisfy conditions 2 and 3, respectively, that can be made from this event. Condition 2, Huck feels empathy because Huck feels an emotion because Jim feels an emotion, is meant to express mutual feelings between Huck and Jim, where the feelings expressed by Jim spark the emotion by Huck. It can be seen that Huck feels the emotion that Jim feels. Jim can finally taste freedom knowing that he has a white person that is loyal to him. Likewise, Huck can feel the same emotion, namely Jim's desire for freedom. That is why he proceeds down the river rather than paddling ashore. Furthermore, condition 3, Huck knows or understands that Jim feels O, whatever O was, I forget, can also be seen in the above event. If Huck has no understanding of what Jim has undergone, then he would not have taken it upon himself to make sure Jim has rightly earned his freedom. Huck is also reminding himself that his actions are wrong because society tells him so. See, this is what I think, this is the conflict. Huck is always reminding himself that his actions are wrong because society is telling him so. So this is where he's getting pulled in two directions. However, his actions show that he understands what Jim is feeling and that he must ultimately act on his own feelings in order to help Jim. Yet, when do your own feelings override the rules of society? That's the question. Huck is not merely a naive adolescent who is unaware of his surroundings, and especially that of Jim's. One may be quick to object to this position, arguing that Huck is certainly not correct when he tells himself that he has an obligation to turn Jim in. I agree Huck cannot be praised for stating such a belief. He is a young boy who has known only one belief growing up, that is, racism. However, Not only does he not comply with those teachings, he defies what those teachings stand for. If Huck had been unaware of what the correct act should have been, he would not have had thoughts such as, he was most free, and who was to blame for it? Why, me. Here Huck acknowledges the belief he has been taught, namely to help a slave, is immoral. However, he in no way acts on the belief because he recognizes through his own compassion that racism is immoral. This shows that Huck understands what Jim is going through and will take whatever means necessary to help him. Kadir says, I'm pretty good at differentiating between my head and my heart, and usually these days makes the best choice except for when a woman is involved and I have no clue and I just ride the rails. Yeah. But in some sense, you're probably older, and I'm going to assume you're older because if not, you have to leave. Older than Huck. Huck is a kid. Because it would be TOS for you to be here otherwise. But like Huck's a kid. And so this is why there's like struggle. Huck cannot really make these, cannot really separate it. And so that's what like the authors are trying to do. The author of the paper is trying to pull these things apart where Huck could not. Yeah. Huck's action, as Hirschhaus correctly writes, are virtuous, and even more so, his whole self merits praise. Huck, unlike a fully virtuous agent, does not have a virtue-relevant goal. Thus, he is unaware that his actions or empathic feelings are correct, not his beliefs. In other words, his inverse Akratic nature has forced us to examine Huck differently than a fully virtuous agent. For the latter, one only needs to investigate her motivations and her current thoughts. This, in turn, will explain why she has performed the virtuous act. On the other hand, Huck never explicitly says what those motivations are, and yet his heart has led him to perform the correct actions. See, right here, Caudillo, right here. You already know what the heck is going on. You're smarter. You're older, you're smarter, you're wiser. So you already know the answer. Huck is not as smart, as old, as wise as you are. Huck does not know. And so why is Huck doing the right thing is the question. And they're trying to come up with a good answer. My task then will be to show how his empathic feelings of compassion are linked with a principle of justice. And see, this is what the author is doing. They have to make something up. And this is what they're making up, a story about why there is actually a principle of justice that will ground the virtuous acts of Huck Finn. Justice in accordance with compassion is the foundation by which Huck performs the correct actions. Even though Huck does not realize he is upholding such a principle, I will explain the close connection between his empathic feelings and justice. This will explain why Huck performs just acts. The essence of empathy can be a study unto itself. However, I am interested in it as a pro-social motive, as Hoffman calls it. By this, I mean a person's empathic feelings lead her to act in such a way that helps another in distress. Thus far, I have explained the nature of empathy and why Huck can be considered empathic. However, for the purpose of this paper, I am interested in exploring empathy as a motivational tool, one that guides Huck to perform just acts. Hoffman states, according to his definition, that empathy entails a psychological process that makes one's own feelings more congruent with someone else's experience than one's own. Cardieu says, I think simply because sometimes good just prevails against all odds. I feel like it's that simple. That sounds very optimistic to me, Cardieu. I don't have any such feeling. I don't know that good tends to prevail. I am generally... Yeah, I don't know of any real way to put it other than I disagree with you on things. Yeah, things are just not always so good. In other words, the empathizer must concern himself with the victim's feelings and experiences more than with oneself. Hoffman uses this as the framework to show how empathy can be used as a pro-social motivation. In Huck's case, his empathic feelings have helped him to perform the socially correct actions since he is concerned with Jim's feelings more than his own. Since Hoffman is an empirical psychologist, I will be drawing a great deal from his findings in empathy as a pro-social motive for moral actions. This will provide insight into Huck's character and ultimately show why he helps Jim. Insight into Huck's character in turn will shed light on the general question of how empathy with others can facilitate the performance of virtuous action. Aristotle says too many historical examples where good took a little too long to prevent a lot of suffering. Yeah, I mean, I understand, like, some people think the course of history bends towards justice. I'm not sure, like, that's... No, the story is fiction. But it's a very famous story, and they're using it as a, you know, as an excuse to, the story is fiction, and they're using it as an excuse to discuss, how people can do the right thing even if they're not explicitly instructed to do so. And that's kind of interesting because they're trying to show why people get things right. And so that's why it's a work of philosophy, is like, what is the foundation for ethics in this sense? Why do people get things right? Okay, so we got another few more pages on this. In this section, I am interested in showing the relationship between Huck's empathic feelings and justice in order to illustrate a general connection between empathy and justice. See, right here. This is exactly what we're talking about. A general connection between empathy and justice. So how does something inherent to people, that would be empathy, relate to a bigger concept that would be justice? So that's kind of, and that's why it's a question of foundation of ethical thought and, like, motivation within people, is because if there's something inherent to people that relates closely, a general connection to justice, which is something sort of abstract. Okay, Huck's empathy will guide him to perform just acts. Huck develops empathic anger, a pro-social motive with Jim because of the way he is treated. I mean, God could do that, clearly. This is something else, though, and that's why this is an philosophy argument. It's in virtue ethics. So how are these things connected? They're saying, well, there's something else to it, and they're gonna pull on this pro-social psychology. Now, you can take issue with that. Like, you can say this is, like, the psychology is just reflecting the powers that, like, exist metaphysically. But whatever, that's not what they're saying here. So empathic anger, as Hoffman writes, and this Hoffman here is the psychologist. Hoffman writes, occurs when the victim is angry at the abuser and the observer picks up on that anger and feels empathic anger. In this case, Jim is a victim of unjust Southern laws since they punish him for his skin color rather than his actions and character. Huck never damns Southern laws, but his empathic feelings with Jim show his problems with them. Huck recognizes the disparity between himself and Jim because he has been taught to treat Jim differently, yet on the other hand, he sees Jim as a good person and cannot understand why one with good character should be treated in such a way. A similar phenomenon is seen in a study done by R. Coles that is explicated by Hoffman. In this study, a 14-year-old Southern white boy witnesses a black boy his age being harassed in school. Furthermore, that same boy also harasses the black boy for weeks. One day, the white Southern adolescent began to see this boy as a kid, not one who should be victimized. He even defended him against those who felt differently. After defending him, the white boy looked at him and said, "I'm sorry." Later, the boy had been asked by Coles why he changed his attitude, and the boy gave two responses. One, no matter what had been done to the black boy, he had always behaved. And two, something in the white boy began to change. He never said what it was that changed, nor did he explain how he changed. However, what we know is that he had a change of heart that likely resulted from empathy. There is much to be said for the feelings this Southern white boy had for one of his peers. Huck, unlike the schoolboy, never believes it is right for him to say, "I'm sorry," to Jim, but his actions speak louder than words. Huck asks himself on the raft if he would feel better if he had given Jim up, and he responds, "No, says I'd feel bad." Then, what is Huck, like the Southern white boy, sorry about? I believe Huck is angry about the way Jim is subjected to Southern laws. He did nothing morally wrong, and this provides Huck with the motivation, his empathic feelings, to keep helping him, even though he cannot understand why he continues to do so. My music go out? My music went out. Why did that happen? Oh no, it's just a quiet moment in the music. Okay, that's all. Let's work through Huck's developmental process to see if we can figure out what is motivating his what his motivation is for helping Jim. Yes, I can't always hear it. The Huck's feelings begin as empathic distress since Jim is under great pressure to flee the South to gain his freedom. Yeah, and because I decided I wanted to make commands, there you guys can find out the music. That's who runs. This is the DMCA stream beats I'm playing in the background by Ill Advised Records. So, empathic distress, as Hoffman correctly points out, is associated with helping but always precedes it. In Huck's case, he has empathic feelings of distress with Jim and thus helps him. Huck reminds himself over and over that helping Jim is wrong. Therefore, if Huck had lacked such empathic feelings, then he would not have helped Jim. I believe Huck's empathic feelings of distress eventually turn into empathic feelings of injustice. This transition allows Huck to continue helping Jim even though he does not see why. Likewise, it also explains why the schoolboy in Cole's study had a sudden change of heart. He could not explain what it was that made him change, but it was something inside, namely seeing the injustice brought upon his peer. Like the schoolboy, Huck's compassion recognizes that Jim is being treated unfairly, and because of the unfairness, performs acts that are contrary to what he has been taught and even believes. In other words, Huck has empathic feelings of injustice because he sees the lack of reciprocity between Jim's character and the actions and their consequences. Alright, so just to explain what happened here is that, look, you can feel bad for somebody. You can feel the same thing that they're feeling because you feel like that they don't deserve what's getting happening to them. So like if someone's getting beaten up or like treated badly for, the laws or whatever else reason, you can feel empathic for them. But that is going to fade when you like go walk away from them. That's going to fade. That will not keep you in helping somebody over time. So the author is now arguing that once you've had enough empathic feelings, you see that the injustices are continuing, then you get a sense of justice, that there is a continued feelings over time, and the continued feelings of the continued empathy is really what's underlying a sense of justice here. Okay. Reciprocity, as Hoffman writes, relates to justice and fairness, such as being treated equally or rewarded for what one deserves. Hoffman also says reciprocity itself is not a pro-social motive like empathy, but is a significant factor in helping to develop empathic feelings of injustice. Let's apply this model to Huck. First, Huck has empathic feelings of distress for Jim. He empathizes with many of the struggles Jim experiences. Furthermore, he also recognizes the lack of fairness between the way Jim is treated and his character. This is Huck's recognition of the lack of reciprocity. From this, Huck has empathic feelings of injustice with Jim. Keep in mind, Huck, an inverse Akratic, recognizes the lack of reciprocity different than most people. His recognition is derived from empathic feelings and not knowledge. Notice Huck does not begin with an understanding of reciprocity and conclude with injustice. Rather, he begins with empathic distress and through lack of reciprocity concludes with empathic feelings of injustice. Yeah, so you're moving from the distress and then somehow that there is a larger thing going on. So the distress leads to this lack of reciprocity, and then the lack of reciprocity gets you to injustice, because distress on its own is not enough to get a continuing sense of distress. It's just distress then, but the fact that it is never reciprocated, that what's happening to Jim is never due to some fault of Jim's. It's not doesn't correspond. That leads from distress to injustice. The lack of reciprocity, or like correspondence, I would say, not necessarily reciprocity. The lack of reciprocity is derived from Huck's moral principles being violated. On the surface, this appears to be the problem with Huck, namely that he does not challenge Southern laws. Since this is the case, it would seem fair to attribute more immoral principles to Huck. However, I am reluctant to do such a thing. These immoral principles have been inculcated in him since birth, but he never acts on them. His lack of overtly challenging the laws does not preclude him from possessing moral principles. Furthermore, I would like to attribute moral principles to Huck in accordance with his compassion. The moral principle that Huck possesses is justice. As I suggested above, empathic feelings of injustice follow from empathic feelings of distress. However, in order to have such feelings of injustice, one must have a principle, or at least some understanding of justice. Yeah, Caudillo, this one, I have to say this paper is a little bit extra wordy. I don't think they're going very far, but they're taking a lot of words to get there. Hoffman says, in reference to the white schoolboy, the one may be exposed to a principle of justice at a young age. From this, the boy is able to recall the principle and apply it to the given situation. I believe much of the same can be said for Huck. I would suggest that Huck has been taught from an early age how to treat others with respect and praise those with good character. He should be, and is, confused by the double standard, since on the one hand he has been taught to praise people based on one's good nature, and yet on the other hand, people were punishing Jim even though he is good-natured. Jim's character did not give any suggestion that he ought to be punished. Furthermore, his likable personality has been one of the reasons Huck's compassion leads him to help Jim during the most difficult times. Moreover, his compassion is able to ignore the beliefs that Jim should be treated differently regardless of his character, although he never understood why. I believe this lack of understanding can be attributed to his natural capacity to empathize. Aristotle says this paper used too many technical inventions. They didn't have to talk so fancy. No, this is it's not a bad paper. It's just a little bit there's like too much philosophical flourish, and in a bad way here. Like, you know, there could be like literary flourish. This is philosophical flourish, and it's not a good philosophical flourish is not to be that's not a good thing. It's philosophical, like academic philosophy. It's like academic flourish, I should really say. Like academic flourish here. Okay. But like I said, not a bad paper. It's just the style is unfortunate, I think. Okay, even though Huck in the school... Yeah, let's finish it up. It should be... Yeah, this should be finishing right up over here. Okay. Even though Huck and the schoolboy have been exposed to a principle of justice, their actions are extremely rare for their times. I believe one cannot merely say they were taught the meaning of justice at a young age and able to apply it when the situation had presented itself. If that is all it takes, then many more people would have been forthright in their efforts to stop injustice. Keep in mind, Huck and the schoolboy have not been taught to treat blacks equally, and yet they managed to do the right thing. I believe this shows Huck has a natural empathic capacity to allow him to feel, not necessarily know, right and wrong against all odds. If he had known right and wrong, he would not question his actions. Therefore, Hursthouse correctly labels Huck's whole self as virtuous and not fully virtuous. Evolve Yourself says, as the content is solid, I'm okay with weak form. Yeah, this isn't a bad paper. I completely agree. It's just, maybe it's not the best streaming content for me, but I mean, I subject myself to Roulette, so I read whatever. But yeah, like, as far as philosophy goes, this really isn't, like, I don't have any, like, major beefs with the writing. It's just the academic flourish is, grading over time. But, like, as far as philosophy writing goes, it's not that bad. Like, once you're in philosophy writing, it's not bad. Outside of it, it could be better. But that's outside of it. All right, let me finish up. Like, this is, we got still 2.5, 3 more. Wow, okay, this goes all the way to the end. That's annoying. I was hoping there was, like, a bunch of references at the bottom, but I guess it's not there. Yeah, so we got 3 more pages. Let's get through this. Let us return to Hursthouse analysis of Huck Finn. It is a shorter paper, too. Huck is a very complicated character because he has an ongoing commitment to the belief that his actions are wrong. Thus, we label him as an inverse Akratic. Hursthouse believes at most we can say Huck is on the path to a virtuous life. Huck lacks the epistemic criteria of knowing that he is doing the virtuous act, thus we cannot call him fully virtuous. Hursthouse sums up Huck's case by saying that he acts virtuously for X reasons, where V is a virtuous act and X is compassion. How do my discussions in section 2 and 3 help bolster Hursthouse's claim and deal with the complexity of Huck's character? As I said at the end of section 3, I believe Huck has a natural empathic capacity that helped him to perform morally right actions. Hoffman cites a study done by Siegelman and Weitzman where they examined age difference, kindergartner, 4th grade, and 8th grade, and the distributive justice reasoning productivity, democratic ideals, and social responsibility. They found that with age, children become aware of norms based on 1. Productivity and reward for work, 2. Democratic ideals looking for equality, 3. Social responsibility for those in need. They concluded that the hallmark of distributive justice reasoning is an ability to choose and apply the principle of justice most appropriate to the demands of the situation at hand. This study shows that as children become older, they are able to reason about distributive justice, rewarding people based on production, youngest to those in need, oldest. The figure of Huck also illustrates this finding. Huck is a prime example of one who has shown that he can apply the proper form of justice according to the given situation. As Hoffman points out, it is not that simple to say that a person is in this age group, and thus she should be able to make take certain things into account and make the proper judgment. Many adults, much less children, have trouble properly applying the correct form of justice. However, I believe Huck has shown the reasoning more properly, following of the heart, to apply the right form of justice given the circumstance. He has displayed the reasoning of 2, insofar he believes Jim ought to be treated as any other person who has good character. However, he should be most prominently known by 3, since he not only treats Jim as equal, but continues to go out of his way to help him attain freedom. In other words, Huck believes he has a responsibility to help Jim because he is in need. However, Huck does not understand why, due to his inverse Akratic nature, he should help Jim since it is against his beliefs, but regardless, he continues to help him. See, this is all review. We didn't need any of this, really. I'm like, why am I just restating this whole thing? In academic philosophy, this is fine because, they've sort of summed things up and, wrapped up the paper here. But still, this just got said 3 paragraphs earlier. Okay, since Huck has applied the correct form of justice given to the situation, he is morally praiseworthy. He has shown at a young age what following your heart can do, that is, help restore justice to those who face injustice. Huck's inescapable problem is an epistemic one. He believes throughout his journey with Jim that he is doing the wrong thing by helping him. I agree with Hursthouse that his lack of knowledge precludes Huck from being called a fully virtuous agent. How many fucking times has this line been said? However, Huck has certainly displayed actions that merit praise, and even more so, his character is worthy of praise. Thus, like Hursthouse, I believe Huck's whole self is morally praiseworthy. His actions show that his commitment to help Jim runs deeper than his unchallenged racist beliefs. Hey JT Farms, how you doing? Therefore, we can say Huck is virtuous. There are 2 claims that must be noted about this statement. Huck is on the path to a virtuous life, and 2, he is not fully virtuous. I believe Huck has met Hurshouse's criteria to be considered a virtuous agent, that is, he has performed a virtuous act for compassionate reasons. His compassion has led him to perform virtuous acts of justice and loyalty. He never strays from Jim's side regardless of his beliefs. Moreover, his empathic feelings of injustice guide him to perform the just acts. Huck does not have moral principles outside of his compassion that would guide him to do just acts. However, as Hoffman writes, moral principles do not need to come purely from teaching, since, when combined with empathy, they gain motive properties. In other words, Huck's empathic feelings combined with his caring to help Jim guide him to perform virtuous acts. Ultimately, we are able to attribute virtue to Huck's whole self. Right here, there's the word care. You can describe a lot of this in terms of, what do you care about? Do you care about the laws or do you care about the people? And so, this is in some sense the, maybe a more contemporary, I don't know if it's contemporary, is in some sense where I've seen this sort of thing. Where does care come in, Where does care come into the discussion? What do you care about? And it turns out Huck cared more about the person than the laws that he was supposed to follow. Okay. Oh dear God, we're going to have to read this for the 5th time. An inverse Akratic is a person who believes that she is performing the wrong act, but is actually correct. A well-known case of inverse Akrasia used in this paper is Huck Finn. He faces a moral dilemma. On the one hand, he believes he should not be helping Jim, and yet, on the other hand, he cannot figure out why he continues to help him. Hursthouse believes, based on the whole self, Huck's whole self merits praise. However, she will not go as far as to say that he is fully virtuous. I am in full agreement with her, however, I believe her position could be further developed. Following her position, I explained the nature of empathy and how it differs from sympathy. Moreover, I applied the definition of empathy to Huck in order to show that Huck empathizes with Jim. From this, I used Hoffman's book on empathy and injustice. Like Hoffman, I use empathy as a pro-social motive. This guides Huck to perform the right action. As I have shown, Huck begins with empathic feelings of distress upon witnessing Jim's struggles. Then Huck sees the lack of reciprocity between Jim's good character and the way he is treated by Southern laws. This results in Huck's having empathic feelings of injustice. These feelings help explain Huck's motivation to continue helping Jim earn his freedom. These actions, along with Huck's empathic feelings, merit him moral praise. From analyzing Huck's case, some general lessons can be learned. First, empathy can motivate an agent to perform virtuous actions, even without an agent's knowing or believing she is performing the correct act. Second, empathy can influence an agent's whole character. That is, we can attribute virtue to a person's whole self because of the role that empathy plays in producing her virtuous actions. Empathy, then, is an important contributing factor on the path to full virtue. This guy's fired. Huck empathized with Jim, injustice, blah, blah, blah. Morally praised with virtue. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That took a little bit of, it's like, this is one of the times when I don't want to just, like, go look at the author and at what point in their career did they write it. But, like, I just feel like this is one of these, early career philosophers that had to restate the point a million times just to make sure they got it across, and they weren't like confident enough in their argumentation. So I don't know. So the writing, that I didn't want to say that, Aristotle. That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, this feels like a souped up grad student paper. And this is the thing. Now, was there a positive contribution? Yes. The argument that you can get from empathy to distributive justice might be worth something here. I'm not sure it is. The argument that you can account for this sort of thing in neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics is positive contribution. As I think Evolve Yourself said, as long as the content is solid, you're okay with weak form. That's what it is. And as Aristotle was saying, it isn't a bad paper. It's just extremely formulaic paper. And why do you rely on formula? Well, because it's a crutch to help you to account for things that you might not do so well otherwise. It's not a in the sense of, is the philosophy bad here? No, the philosophy is not bad here. Just it's a gripe over form in this paper. That's all I'm griping over. Like, if I want to argue, how does a contemporary virtue ethicist explain sort of these borderline cases? It's not a bad idea. That's fine. Like, if this is your if this is your bag, then like this is not a bad way to go about it. You say, look, you can have an inherent understanding of empathy due to like psychology or something, and this will provide counter reasons to your lack of fully formed virtues and can act as a guide. So you can say, look, you have empathy. Not everyone, in fact, most people will not have developed it, but if you do work on it, maybe by yourself or just in general, like you have actually taken things to heart and you have this sort of empathy for people, then you can use trusting your gut as a guide to do the right things on your path to being a more virtuous person. So, sure. If you buy that story, this is good. If you don't, then, it's not. Again, I think I was saying at the very beginning of the paper, are you in the sort of the religious tradition in the West that says basically that we are inherently sort of good things, and that means like there's a purity to us that we can actually draw upon and trust our gut? Or do you not have this sense where it says, look, people some might be good, some might be bad, but there is no inherent goodness overall, and so we basically have to be trained up to get a better sense of what does count as good. And I think that's the classic Greek Aristotelian line, is that we need to be a little bit trained up. Otherwise, I mean, it's just being part of society. And so you need to actually be a little bit more trained up, and then you know what's good. But it's not that hard. Just being part of society is what it is. So the question is, where do you fall down? The author here falls down on, look, some people can be sort of moral saints and have just empathy, and that's kind of what they're attributing to Huck Finn, is that he has enough empathy to guide his own virtuous training. Aristotle says it's all coming down to the idea that in order for us to get credit for doing something good, we have to have done it intentionally. Aristotle, I'm out of water at the moment. I've drank it all, and my voice is going. And this is going to be the end of stream very soon, one way or the other. I mean, I can't drink. The side flip, I'm sorry, I can't drink at the moment. I have to go get more water. I can't. Like, I can come back, but like, I'm gonna end stream. I'm gonna end stream like right now. This is my limit. I can't go much farther. So yes, I appreciate you are all canceling the word. You can get one of them, not both of them. You don't get to cancel words. It's cancel word, not both. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, you get to pick one. I'll try not to say them. But yeah. So basically, this is what it is. If you have something within you, clearly not the E word that was just canceled, then maybe you can guide your own training to become a better person. And so, like, yeah. So if you are a moral saint in something, or you're smart enough, or you've taken these lessons to heart, then you can find something within yourself, be it gut or otherwise, that lets you train up your virtue, which then can correspond to a grander sense of justice and make you a better person. Otherwise, I don't know, like the idea that that's possible, I mean, that's a very nice thought, but I mean, I don't know if that's the way people actually are, or if that's how people are in general, or maybe that's just what makes Huck Finn an interesting person, is that he does have this sense of how to do things by feeling with other people. You don't know what IDEC? What's IDEC? I don't know what virtue means. Virtue in the in this sense means that there are habits that have built up over time that basically like you've worked up enough good habits and understanding things about the world that when shit hits the fan, you do the right thing because this is how you've been trained up to be. And it's not because you're reasoning something, but it's because this is how you have built yourself in a way to act correctly given various circumstances. And that means you have virtue. Like you have the virtue of being courageous. We don't know what the situation will be in the future, but being courageous in the light of troubles is a virtue because that will help you get through them. So, hey JT. Hope you're doing well. So, I hope everyone here is well. I am definitely, yes, that's exactly right, Kadu. Let's go see if we can, find someone to raid.